The history of Afghanistan, from Alexander the Great to now, is one superpower or another coming in, dominating for a certain amount of time, and then departing. As they say, the graveyard of empires. The intelligence community had at least one probable scenario where the government would fall within weeks. I don't think that we should be surprised, that it fell quicker than that. We should have seen this.
Monumental decision about America's longest war.
20 years, 2,400 American military deaths, $4 trillion. U.S. troops are leaving Afghanistan.
When you move the chess piece on the board, somebody else moves into that position. Who is that?
It's about whether the Afghans can prevent the Taliban and al-Qaeda from regaining a terrorist.
There's been no let-up in fighting.
I trust the capacity of the Afghan military.
Taliban is now in control of Afghanistan.
He is considering the August 31st deadline. Taliban calling it a red line.
There are reports of shots being fired by the Taliban.
The stunning collapse of Afghanistan plays out in real time. We're ending America's longest war.
They've been trying to do this, and today the United States signed a deal with the Taliban so that we can hopefully begin the immediate process of finally bringing our troops back home.
It could at least be the beginning of the end of the very long war here in Afghanistan. Signed in Doha, Qatar, with Secretary of State Pompeo presiding, an agreement between the United States and the Taliban that calls for the withdrawal of U.S. troops down to about 8,600 in the next months, with much of the remainder following that.
The Doha Peace Accords, the way history looked at it, it was essentially a negotiation for our surrender, right? The only thing that we said our objectives was to be able to get out of there without, having a lot of confrontation with the Taliban. But to their credit, they said that was conditions-based.
In exchange for the Taliban's action against al-Qaeda and other terrorists who could threaten us, we're prepared to begin those force withdrawals.
President Trump is the one who runs on a platform of wanting to pull all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. If you look at the Afghan war today, it's not the Afghan war as it was 10 years ago. Back in 2010, 11, we had more than 150,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and we're taking casualties. The Afghan war really since 2017 and 18 has been one that's been characterized by very low U.S. casualties and a much more competent Afghan military that has been taking the fight to the Taliban. So when President Biden announced the complete troop withdrawal on April 14th, it really registers amongst Afghans as a vote of no confidence in the Afghan government as well as the Afghan army.
When I came to office, I inherited a diplomatic agreement duly negotiated between the government of the United States and the Taliban. It's perhaps not what I would have negotiated myself, but it was an agreement made by the United States government, and that means something.
The current administration had no obligation to carry through on that agreement. It had been violated, and they chose not to carry through on a lot of agreements of the previous administration. The idea that their hands were tied, I think, is just not true, and they elected to continue on with this plan. I think it's very clear that they did not upend their end of the deal. ISIS Khorasan is not only operating, but attacked us in an area that was supposed to be secured by the Taliban. But the Haqqani network, which is a foreign terrorist organization, is in charge of security in Kabul for the Taliban. The way I see it, they have violated every part of the agreement.
I think one of the most notable parts that's gotten a lot of attention, and deservedly so, is the release of a whole host of high-value Taliban and al-Qaeda prisoners. Those are individuals who we've now seen return to the battlefield, and many of them are key power brokers in the new Taliban government in Afghanistan.
There's already trouble in the U.S. Taliban peace deal. After a 7-day partial truce, the Taliban now says it's resuming offensive operations, not against the U.S., but Afghan forces. The Afghan government rejected the deal's call for the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners.
We didn't include the Afghan government at all, and they were essentially a non-entity when it came to this decision. The Afghans, who were doing 98% of the fighting, had shown a willingness to fight the Taliban, and many of them had given their life in the process. So when we elected to completely withdraw, regardless of the requests of the Afghan government, and then withdraw the actual military support, which they relied on to fight the Taliban, in many places they were outnumbered.
To see is a crisis of confidence and a complete collapse of those institutions, particularly as this announcement is made in the lead up to the fighting season. And so when that fighting season begins, we see a very intense Taliban offensive that leads to one city and one key bit of strategic terrain falling after another.
We started seeing the Taliban essentially envelop provisional capitals without going in. And what we saw them doing was essentially letting everybody know that as soon as this withdrawal happened, that they would be taking over these towns, and there wouldn't be air support, our air support, to stop them. They saw that if they moved quick enough, they could get inside these urban areas, which made air support very difficult, before we could react. And they saw that we weren't reacting. So then we started seeing the country fall. We haven't even withdrawn yet. So the entire country fell.
We see President Biden's administration orders the evacuation of Bagram Air Base. So by July 2nd, the U.S. military completes the evacuation, leaving in the middle of the night, not even alerting our Afghan allies that we were vacating. And this is a decision that only adds to the calamitous nature of the final withdrawal.
Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
The Taliban continues to make gains across Afghanistan, militants claiming to have seized another border crossing.
On July 14th, we see Spin Bulldog fall. On August 6th, we see Zaranj in Nimruz province fall. And by August 8th, we've seen 3 more provincial capitals fall to the Taliban. At this point, it's obvious to anyone watching that momentum has shifted in their favor.
They had their momentum from a military perspective, and this kept going and going and going because they wanted it to become a fait accompli, settled, that this is what's going to happen. So they could either be the last guy who died trying to stop it, or they could just capitulate. We saw this happening. It wasn't a surprise once we saw huge areas like Kandahar, the birthplace of the Taliban, Haran, major city out in the west. I mean, I could go down the laundry list of significant places that were being taken over with some resistance, but also a lot of just complete capitulation.
Simply surrendering to the Taliban, allegedly depicted in an amateur video, escaping to neighboring Tajikistan.
Forces not only leaving, and this is going to be a continuing problem, leaving hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons equipment that were provided by the U.S., that is some of the most sophisticated in the world, now in the hands of the Taliban.
The Taliban took possession of the airport, taking photographs in American military aircraft which had been disabled, carrying the weapons that the U.S. government bought for the Afghan army.
Their army went from a militia, which is the one we defeated in 2001, to now one of the best equipped militaries out there. It's a shocking scenario that is played out in the worst possible way.
Back in Washington, President Biden briefly returned to the White House from his Camp David retreat to address the nation about the chaos.
Joe Biden spent the vast majority of his speech deflecting blame.
But he also passed blame. Accusations that President Biden is playing the blame game.
Biden laid the blame for Afghanistan's rapid fall on a number of factors, including people like the Afghan military.
Truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
For those that have fought alongside them, we know that when put to the task, we have seen them fight. And we've seen them not only give up their lives fighting the Taliban, but save ours. So then the question is why? Why did they collapse? Every time we try to create a military and a mirror image force of our own, it does not do well when we withdraw our support. We decided to precipitously withdraw from Iraq. The ISIS menace took on the Iraqi security forces, which had M1 tanks, F-16 fighters. They routed them, quite frankly. When we left in Afghanistan, we saw something similar. We've designed that force to fight with a significant air component. They don't have a significant air component. So when we stopped Bagram, we left a lot of units that relied on support.
The president acknowledged his decision will be criticized. He said he preferred that over passing the war to a fifth U.S. president.
I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. The mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces.
This idea of the endless war is more of a political slogan. It is in our interest to stay there and ensure stability.
Somewhere in our American narrative, we seem to have gotten in our head that wars end when all the troops come home, that's a prerequisite for a war ending. If you look historically, that has never been the case. In fact, the troops only all come home when we lose the war. If you look at the wars that we've won, we leave troops behind to secure the peace.
We still have troops in Germany, Japan, Italy, Spain, Kosovo, South Korea, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, 5,000, maybe up to 7,500 troops. They could have maintained our capability to support our Afghan partners. These people were not going out on combat operations. Most of them were supporting air operations in support of the Afghans' ground operations. We are the United States, and we try to uphold human rights around the world. We have done, I think, with our partners, a great deal of good in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. By the time that this decision was made, we had a female mayor of Kabul, and I think the female enrollment in the university was almost matched the male enrollment. So we had done a lot of good, but we did essentially nothing to try to preserve that.
The thing that's so remarkable in this entire Afghan story is that continually the United States is confronting crises of its own making, whether it be decisions like closing Bagram Air Base or withdrawal dates like September 11th or then August 31st. Time and time again, Afghanistan becomes a crisis of our own creation.
It was just a compilation of events that led to this precipitous fall. Yes, I would acknowledge that it was quicker than most had thought. The intelligence community had at least one probable scenario where the government would fall within weeks. Saying that it is probable that the Afghan government could fold and the Taliban to take over within weeks after its withdrawal is essentially enough of a warning that I think we should have seen this coming.